So welcome back to the Wild Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Finning, and today I have a very special guest, Nina Goradia, and she is a physical therapist and a somatic experiencing specialist?
Practitioner.
Okay. So she's going to share with us this modality, this adjunctive therapy, that is just amazing, especially if you've suffered trauma. And so we're going to dive into that. But first, I always like to find out and share with our audience, how did you get into this? Tell us a little bit about your history, even getting into physical therapy, and then what led you to become a somatic experiencing practitioner.
Sure, my pleasure, and thank you for having me. So when I decided to become a physical therapist, it was very... I wasn't sure at that time what I wanted to do, and my dad had the suggestion, why don't you shadow all of my friends and you can actually see what these professions look like in real time. And the moment I saw the PT, I had this thought in my head, this person's job is to relieve pain, and that is what I want to do. So I really felt fully pulled into this profession. I loved that it was natural healing, and I enjoyed it for many years. But then I noticed there was a population that I would work with and they just wouldn't get better. And I couldn't figure that out. And what I realized eventually when I came across the somatic experiencing work is that I had been trained only mechanically. And there was this entire emotional component to physical illness, health, and healing. And so it took myself getting rear-ended on the highway a couple of times and suffering whiplash injury. And I did every PT thing that I could think of. And I still had this, severe whiplash issue. So one day I was at a health fair and I stopped at a booth where there was a chiropractor. And if you know PTs and chiropractors, we historically have been kind of pegged against each other. So I was desperate.
I do know that little war.
Yes, I was really looking for help. And I just asked him, I said, could you just look at this real quick? I've done everything. And he said, did you ever think it wasn't physical, that it's psychological? I said, how could that happen? I was physically hit twice. And he said, well, do you think you might have looked in the rearview mirror and then you saw that this car was going to hit you, and do you think you might have tensed up? And in that moment, I thought, that's possible. And I knew that drunk drivers sustain less injuries than sober drivers. So I knew there was something to what he was talking about. So he said, I have a somatic experiencing practitioner that works in my office. Why don't you come over and give it a try? So I worked with her for 2 sessions, and it was incredible. We worked the event, the motor vehicle accident. So I called it up in my mind, and we went through it again. And I worked through the movements that I wish I had done at that time. I worked through the emotions that arose at that time, because you can access it just by thinking about it. And at the end of the second session, my neck was 75% less painful. And it stayed that way. And I was just mind blown. I immediately enrolled in the program, not thinking I would ever practice, but I simply wanted to figure out what just happened here.
Sure.
So I went for the first year and I thought, no, I'm never going to practice. I'm just going to do a year. And then after that, no, I'm definitely doing the second year. I'm definitely doing the third year. And then I was like, this is my life now. This has changed everything for me. So just seeing how emotions can show up as physical muscular contractions, as constrictions, as tightness, as pain, and then seeing that in real time leave during a session, both within myself and clients, has just been just a blessing to see that.
Sure, definitely. We work with the similar concepts as in yoga therapy, and looking at the integration of the physical body and the mental emotional body, and that in itself, sometimes people are just shocked by that because they do think it's mechanical. And it's one reason why physical therapists and other healthcare professionals refer to me, refer to you, that sort of thing, and are seeking out these things, because there are a lot of people. They'll get MRIs, they'll get, every test under the sun or physical evaluation, and they can't figure out why they're in chronic pain.
Right.
And there's usually an emotional component. Now, of course, that's usually more challenging to deal with, but if people open their eyes to that and seek out, that's one of the reasons I put this podcast together, is to share all of these different mind-body modalities that people can try, because there are different things out there, because different things work for different people. And or even an integration of different modalities, I think, are helpful for people. And I want people to learn that there's something out there that could help you so you don't have to suffer forever and you can have your life back. And
Yes.
so it's often the same story, that somehow you've been introduced to it and because it helped you.
Yes.
And that's how you're like, I've got to learn more and go from there. So thank you for sharing that, because, some people, whether they're in our audience or not, they don't always know about all of these different things. And then also knowing that we've suffered too. Like, just because we've learned to help other people does not mean that we're some magical unicorn.
Right.
Like, we've suffered too, which is what led us to discover certain practices.
Exactly.
And share it with others. So I'm glad. So our audience may or may not be familiar with somatic experiencing. I know you studied with Peter Levine's programs, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so will you share a little bit about what somatic experiencing is, maybe Peter Levine's take on it? Because I know there's other somatic experts out there too,
Yes.
but I'm more familiar with Peter Levine as well.
Sure, absolutely. So somatic experiencing has been around for about 45 years, and Peter Levine is the founder of this particular technique. And it's a 3-year program that is available to medical and mental health professionals. And it's really based on the fight or flight aspect of the nervous system and completing incomplete responses for resolving trauma. So if I was in a traumatic situation many years ago and I didn't feel like I had a voice in that situation, I couldn't stand up for myself, I couldn't run away, those instructions are still stored in my brain because they are reflexive. And if I've learned to clamp those down, that large amount of energy is still stored in my body, and it can influence my life in ways that affect me for years until I learn how to release that. So with somatic experiencing, Peter observed that wild animals don't get traumatized the same way that domesticated animals do. And he was really trying to figure out what the difference was. And he realized it's the wild animals that get to actually complete those instincts, follow their fight or flight responses, and that unloads a huge amount of adrenaline that's there to supply us with this large amount of energy to fight or flee. But domesticated animals, because we've trained them, it's just one of many reasons that they're susceptible to PTSD, but they learn how to clamp down on those responses, and they can get stuck anywhere along the fight or flight aspect of the cycle. So they can get stuck on, they can get stuck in an anxious state, they can get stuck off in a more of a depressed, shut down sort of state. And humans, we are the most domesticated of all, so we are equally susceptible to PTSD. Many of us have been socialized in various ways regarding our emotions, either to clamp down any sort of expression, which does not allow for enough expression to actually release it from our body. So we might not be aware that we're carrying it, but we're still using a large amount of energy unconsciously to push that emotion down and to distract ourselves to not have to feel it. Other ways we could have been socialized are to react to the stress of an actual event, plus the stress of our thoughts about the event. And that's very common in this day and age where our minds are just so overstimulated. We have so many thoughts happening, and those thoughts can feed the amount of stress, energy that we're carrying. And we can just spin there for years, not releasing it in totality from the body. And then there's also another way, a third way, where we can go into such a level of fear or terror that we go into something called dorsal vagal freeze, which is like the deer in headlights sort of phenomenon. And in this place, we just kind of freeze up and we don't know what to do. And it's the parasympathetic aspect of our nervous system, part of our body that is just pulling this emergency lever that, we feel like this situation is hopeless. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to conserve energy. So based on how we are showing up in that moment with a particular trauma, there are different ways to work with that.
Well, and talk about maybe some examples of different ways to work with that, and maybe even expand upon the role of the vagus nerve, if you can.
Sure.
I know those are two questions in one, because a lot of people don't even realize this exists and how important it is. Because even in yoga therapy, we do a lot of different things, different methods to help the vagus nerve come back to balance and do its job. And so maybe share with that, and then we can dive into some more specific examples.
Absolutely, sure, So regarding the 3 ways that I just shared regarding how we might experience trauma. So the first way, if I've been taught to suppress my emotions and I'm just kind of holding on to all these emotions throughout my life, many people in this situation become very intellectual, and it's called an intellectual bypass, where it can be so painful to be in the body simply because we were never taught what to do. We weren't given enough time, enough space, enough knowledge, enough support about what to do with these emotions. So we kind of come up to our heads and we start living out there because it's less painful. And so with these people, many of them don't even know that emotions show up in their body. So I'll just be doing some general education about, hey, did you know the emotions show up in the body? The most common places they can show up: sensations of stress, head, throat, jaw, chest, stomach, but the arms and legs might also shake. So just kind of tuning them in to really observe and see what's happening in the body. And then I might dig a little bit. Are you sure that's not bothering you? These are the people who will say, I'm fine, it's fine, my childhood was great, and there might be a little bit of denial there, just to self-protect, And so once we can get them to really feel into that and come down from the head and into the body, then it can manifest, it can be expressed enough where it can release. Now, I talk about coming down from the head and into the body. The reason for that is when we're in the body, that is our direct experience. But when we are in our heads and we're commenting about it, that is our commentary about our direct experience. And it's really one step removed. So we can try to analyze something for years. I think many of us have done that. And then just get lost in the circle of the mind. But when we bring it into the body, we bring it into this very tangible way, how we experienced life as a child. And so the emotions arise and we can feel them fully. And once they're expressed, we can go on to the next thing, which is what we see in children. So the next way that we can work with people is when people are experiencing the stress of the event, plus their thoughts feeding the event. What I will say with them, they usually launch into a story when I'm working with them one-on-one in the office. And they might kind of, have their eyes darting around and their feet tapping. And I might say, I notice that a lot is coming up for you emotionally as you tell me the story. I want to hear your story. But if we could put that on hold for a moment, I think all of this needs to be felt through right now. And as they put the story on hold and they bring their attention to the body and what is happening just in this moment, instantly that level of activation comes right down to the place where it's this line. If you look on my website, there's a picture that shows this line called the threshold for release. And the activation comes down, and then we can fully release it from the body instead of feeding it. Now, the third way, when people go into freeze, and they might just think of a trauma and instantly it feels like you can't move. And I've been in freeze many times myself. It's really a surreal experience. But what I tell them is, oh, freeze, that happens to me all the time. And not to dismiss the intensity of what they're feeling, but specifically to guide them into not being afraid of it. Because when I normalize it, we get rid of this fear that's feeding more freeze. That's what feeds it. And so once they see, okay, she seems okay, it's normal, and their thoughts are no longer feeding it, they can just start wiggling out of it. No one stays in freeze forever. So these are just a few of the ways that we can work, and different people can experience different expressions of this based on whatever trauma occurred. So it's not like we're always at one or the other. So that's just an example of how I work with people. I love the vagus nerve. I think I could study 5 more years about the vagus nerve and just not know enough. There's so much there. It's so rich. We do work with the vagus nerve, and just stimulating that has widespread impact throughout the body for emotional resilience, for decreasing activation and stress. And there are many different exercises that can do that. So do you want me to go into kind of specifics?
Share a little bit. There's whatever you're wanting to share today. Our audience can be more familiar, because we're always going to link in our show notes and for everyone out there to Nina's website and Peter Levine's books and those sort of things, and anything else that comes up in our conversation. But the more examples, then people can really understand it. Yeah, wonderful.
Maybe everyone could do it with us while they're listening here. But one exercise is just this sound, the VOO sound, and it's taught in SE programs where you just kind of do this. VOO. And it's it's immediately calming. It stimulates the vagus nerve, and that's just one of the ways that we can access that. So that's a really easy way. I think people can fit that in throughout. Yeah.
Sure. I'm curious, what is the background behind that sound? Do you know anything about that? I'm just curious because in yoga therapy, we have each different sounds to stimulate or calm down the chakras.
Yeah.
And so when you did that, this will be weird for everyone, but if you know me, like I felt that in the root chakra. And so but I'm really in tune with my body.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so
it's possible.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it might correlate with the chakra system, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
at all.
I'm just curious about, well, my mind goes there, like, oh, I'm curious about that because there is such in sounds like that, and that's why they're so powerful, because they stimulate or calm a certain area of the body.
Yes.
And so, yes, getting it out of your head and calming the vagus nerve or stimulating the vagus nerve so it will calm. But I was just curious because there's so many ways to work with sound and chanting, and that sound resonated. So that's interesting.
That's good to hear.
I'll have to practice that one and see how that feels in the body. So,
it's great you're so aware in that way. And the other thing I'll say about the vagus nerve, so we've got, originally I told you about dorsal vagal freeze, which is the back of the vagus nerve that kind of manages that freeze response. But then we've got the ventral vagal area, which is the front of the vagus nerve. And that is actually involved in social, emotional regulation, and so social, the ability to socially engage. So when we have, and you can find a chart on my website that kind of goes into this a bit more, but when we are calm and relaxed and we're feeling, safe, we're able to socially engage. We're at a certain part of this chart where we're at the bottom, we're the parasympathetic area, and you can engage in that way. Also, when we're feeling activated and under stress, connecting with another person is going to help bring us into that place, so that social engagement can also facilitate the decrease in activation and the feeling of safe. So it can go in both directions. And so you can often see that when people are very stressed, it might be very difficult for them to socially engage. They might be in a very panicked or hypervigilant or frozen sort of state. And it's funny how this fight or flight response was originally studied just on men. And so they have this very linear kind of theory with fight, flight, or freeze. But when they study this with women, women have this other component called tend and befriend. Have you heard of this?
No, not in that aspect. I'm curious.
Yeah, it's kind of like this need to be social. So oftentimes if we feel stressed about something or anything in our emotional centers, we've got basically a bundle of cords going to our verbal centers, and we want to talk about it usually.
Sure, that makes sense.
And when they look at male brains, they have almost zero nerves from the emotions to the verbal center. So it just really makes sense that the anatomical difference, how women are going to be more wired when they're stressed to seek out a friend, and that social engagement of that ventral vagal nerve is going to help with that in the grounding.
Oh, well, that makes tons of sense. Complete sense. I was actually, it was last Wednesday, I tried to do a Koya dance class every Wednesday morning. And I had some stressful things that weekend prior, and I hadn't went to class the week before because I chose to do work over dancing, which is not always my best choice. But I went to class and was like, this is exactly what I needed today, because I went to my solitude practices, which helped me. But I needed some community.
Yes.
Like, totally. And it's so essential. And I mean, as humans, we're wired too. And yes, women more so. But we're wired to be social creatures. And a lot of times in my work with clients, people having a community of like-minded individuals is something they don't have. Because they often isolate themselves or push people away if they're suffering from trauma.
Yes.
So we try to create something like that at Embark to the extent that we can at the studio. But, people need that. They don't realize how important it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then when I went to the dance class to Koya, I was like, that's what I needed. so desperately that day, was just to be, it was like a women's circle sort of thing. And I needed that, just to have someone else hold space for me when I'm holding space for so many people all the time. So it's so important. And I'm glad you've mentioned that, because it's really, really important, especially for women.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that there's a huge difference for if I do a yoga class on a YouTube video versus if I come into the studio. It's just night and day for me personally.
Yeah.
It feels good, but I don't feel, what I feel in a studio when I go into a class is that people are holding space for me. There's that community. There's that. I think when we see people face to face, there's a greater sense of empathy and connection and all of that. So yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's something we all desperately need. And sometimes, especially when a world that's so tech heavy, that, and especially for our kids that are so into technology, we don't realize how much we need all of that. And especially women, for the scientific anatomical reasons that you just described, but everyone needs it, men and women. And that's probably why women are flooding more of the complementary medicine, wellness centers and whatnot, seeking that out, and then yoga studios and all of that, because there's some innate need as well.
Yes.
So good. Well, what other examples do you want to share with the audience?
Sure. Yeah. So other examples of ways we can deal with emotions as they come up in this context of somatic experiencing would be just to start identifying emotions in the body in a very tangible way. So when someone thinks of a particular trauma, I'll ask them, well, where do you feel it in the body? Just really see where it feels physically. And it might come up in multiple places. And then I'll ask them, well, pick the one that's calling your attention the most. We'll start with that. Then I'll ask them, can you show me how big it is with your hands? And literally have them show me that. And in order for them to even do that, they have to come really out of their head, bring all the focus tangibly onto the body. And, I ask 5 or 6 more questions about how it looks tangibly, not because I need to know as much as what I'm doing is I'm facilitating their awareness on this tangible to just keep that energy down there. So after the size, then I want to know, what density does it feel like?
Sure.
Does it feel like a solid, liquid, gas, or gel? And even if you've never tried this before, you will somehow know the answer to this as you look at that feeling. And kids, they know right away. They'll tell you exactly. And then I'll ask them, is there a color that spontaneously arises? And only about half the people even see a color with their emotions. And, whatever the color is, it'll have a particular significance, which I'll go into as well. So finally, I want to know, is there a movement happening here? Is the emotion, is it kind of drifting? Is it pulsing, throbbing? Is it static? So once they've looked at these dimensions, they've really got an idea of, okay, this is a physical expression happening in my body. It's not so abstract and vague and just controlling our behavior. We suddenly have some space as we're able to observe it. So we look at the physical expression, and then I want to know, what is your relationship to this feeling? And what that means is, are you afraid of it? Do you not like it? So you've got the feeling, and then how do you feel about having the feeling? So I'm gauging their level of resistance.
Sure.
And so we'll work with this in many different ways. We'll work using dialogue, various sorts of visualization exercises, but we're always going to be living in reality as we do this. I'm not going to have them imagine or retrain them in some other way. What we want to do is look at this expression physically exactly as it's coming up, knowing it can change in any moment. And we're going to employ many techniques that are just going to bring down our resistance to it being there. So the dialogues, they kind of trick the egoic mind that wants to resist into just allowing it, embracing it, feeling it fully. Once we feel the emotions fully, they pass.
Yeah.
And all that really keeps them there, is this resistance. As we know, that which we resist persists.
Yes.
And that's exactly how emotions work. So as we bring to them this acceptance, this love, this care, because they're really, our youngest feelings of hurt that are coming up. And as these wounds come up, they are healed in the balm of our love and acceptance. And if that's hard to do, I tell people, well, then just adopt a neutral, viewpoint of a scientist. But don't judge them, because the judging of them is exactly what's keeping them locked there.
Yes, of course. Well, I do want to hear about the significance of the colors.
Yes.
However, what do you do when someone has a hard time? They're so disconnected from their body. and that they have a hard time even feeling or just resist sensing whatever
Yes.
place in their body. I'm sure you've experienced that. I have with clients. I'm curious what you do.
I tell them to go to a yoga class. Actually, I really do. And many times...
Yeah, it's so helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, many times I'll tell them, go to yoga before our appointment. And when they do that, it's incredible for getting out of the head into the body, and it's going to help develop their ability to be sensitive enough to even perceive the sensations in their body. So when the mind is in this kind of gross, like larger state, it's distracted, it's all over the place. It's very hard to perceive subtle sensations in the body. But then as we can calm the mind down, get fully integrated in the body, we can perceive all sorts of things that we didn't know about before. So that's the number one thing I tell them. After that, I might say, you can push your feet into the ground. You can push your palms into each other. There's so many nerve endings in our palms and the soles of our feet that we can really ground in a great way by stimulation of these areas. I might suggest a weighted blanket, or even wearing clothes that are a couple sizes too small because they give compression. And compression is another way we can relax into the body, whereas light touch would be more stimulating.
Sure.
So there are all these little ways we can kind of hack around and get in. But I will, say that there's a caveat to this, which is some people, they need to be in their head. And I'll tell you why. It's because they might have gone through so much trauma. It is so absolutely scary to be in the body. And if there's that real ongoing resistance, I would never force them. I would really want to explore that and say, okay, I see that this is how you've been able to survive your life. And so maybe we bring up a little bit that we can feel in the body, feel it through, allow it to integrate, and then we have to just go really slow. But eventually the goal would still be to start perceiving and feeling in the body.
Sure, because that's ultimately how they would heal. But
exactly.
Yes, sometimes it's very scary to come into the body
Yes.
and feel all of that, especially if you've been not feeling for years for various reasons.
Yes.
And so to go little by little and just be slow.
And just to learn tools. I'll show them, here are a few self-regulation tools, because if I ask them to just jump in the deep end without giving them any flotation devices and they've never been taught how to swim, most of us are in that situation. This was not on the radar when we were growing up about our emotions, and they show up physically, and how are we supposed to be with them? So just learning a few things like that as well can help it be less scary.
Definitely, and that's true. So I always have the reference of, I have a toolbox, and one I'll use with my clients, but also a lot of those tools I use myself.
Yes.
Because it doesn't mean that things won't happen, that you won't be triggered or something in life. It doesn't mean you have to going through a session, but in life something changes abruptly. How are you reacting? It brings something up. Something triggers you for some reason, or you can't control everything.
Right.
But you can have those self-regulation tools to help you in the moment. And I think that's where sometimes people will expect a miracle, but it's like, no, you can release some of these things, but you can also have tools to help self-regulate when those things happen.
Yes.
And just knowing that you have toolbox and you have that power to do that is sometimes really wonderful in itself. I remember being told, I interviewed one of my mentors on a previous episode, and she had told a story during one of our classes about, they offered a lot of yoga classes, trauma-sensitive yoga classes for people with who'd experienced either sexual abuse, or they were trafficked, or there was something going on. And there was a, the yoga, aerial yoga thing, like a swing sort of thing, still hanging in the studio before class that someone didn't put up. And it triggered something as she walked in of something that happened during her experience that she freaked out. And then, they helped her and calmed down and everything. And what she learned was that I may never stop being triggered, but now I have tools that can calm me down.
Yeah.
So that's what, I think all of these, whether it's yoga, somatic experiencing, and having guides to help guide you and learn these tools, and then having them at home to use or in your daily life, it's so important because it depends, the severity of what went on. And there's so many things, it can be just chaos growing up. It can be something way more invasive into our developmental years and those sort of things. But that was always an interesting story of, she at least, instead of her spiraling down, she came to like, I at least have tools I can use. So I may not be able to control the circumstances, but I have tools.
Right.
Which is huge.
Exactly. We might get triggered and we're touching into that deep, immense pain of that trauma. And then we can learn how to find our way out. And then next time we might be able to go in a little bit further. But yeah.
Exactly. So share a little bit about the significance of colors.
Oh, sure. Yes. Okay. So it's really interesting. I try not to tell too many clients before the session, but they figure it out very soon as we're working together, that the more we work with it and the lower their resistance to the feeling in their body, the color starts to lighten. So if the color is very dark when we start, I know that they're pretty afraid of it or they're pretty resistant to it. And the more that we work with the resistance and accept it and allow it, it starts to get lighter. Similarly, the density will change from solid to gel to liquid to gas. And that's where I know that we are really, accepting it. And so it might appear that the feeling is going away. But I really caution people to not to come into this thinking, I want to get rid of this feeling. I'm trying to get rid of the aversion I have to this feeling. When I do that, it does lighten up, and then it might actually go away. But the moment I have a thought that I want to get rid of it, again, I'm in resistance to it, which is exactly what's going to keep it in place. And so we have to genuinely want to learn about our feelings. We want to discover, are they actually bad or scary like I've been conditioned, or are they harmless? So when we come with this attitude of curiosity, and this intention to really study ourselves, we can come at these feelings through this wanting to discover. And oftentimes we will discover that when we go all the way to the bottom of the feeling, give it a chance, want to, come sincerely and wanting to see it accurately, not through the lens of our fears or our traumas, oftentimes it's completely harmless. I've had so many times with myself and others, even a feeling of terror can come up, and then it turns into a pleasant sensation. And it's shocking how that happens. I can actually give you an example of how that happened for me once. I felt terror all over my body, and I was trying all the techniques, and I couldn't work with it. And I realized I was coming at it with this place of wanting to get rid of it. And then I realized, it feels like vibration all throughout my body. And that's kind of how it feels when I sit in a massage chair. And so I associated it with, I'm sitting in a massage chair and I'm feeling this vibration, because I stopped calling it terror. Because that's it's a very loaded word, right? And it comes with it a lot of resistance. When I thought of it that way, it left within 10 seconds. Something that had just been there for maybe 10 minutes or so. So it's really interesting how the quality of our attention on our sensations completely changes how the sensations appear and our experience of them.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That was a great example of sharing. Are there any specifics that, you shared the sound of VU, which I think is good for people to try. Anything else for someone to try at home? Or, like I said, we'll always link to everything, but anything you want to lead our audience through?
I could actually, how much time do you think we've got?
We've got about 15 minutes before we wrap up.
Yeah, so. we could do a little something like that.
That'd be great, Nina.
Okay, great. So I'd like to ask everyone to just think of something small that's bugging you from this week. Do not pick a big trauma. So if this is especially your first time, it's important that you pick something small so that you can learn the tools how to navigate with this. So something like someone cut you off in traffic, someone didn't email you back, call you back, text you back, something that's just a little bit irritable. You'll know if this is a good example because you'll think of it and you'll actually feel it right now in this moment in your body. So I want everyone, if you feel safe, to close your eyes and think about this incident as if it's really happening right now. And then bring your attention to your body and just see what arises. You might feel a sensation in many different places of the body, but now pick the one that you feel is calling your attention the most. Maybe that's the most intense one. And then I want you to go through some of the things that we talked about here. I want you to really see where are the edges of this. And then use your hands to show me, or show yourself really how big this is. Get an idea of how big this is. And then think about what density it is. Solid, liquid, gas, or gel, or maybe something in between. People have told me things like baseball bat, or, just some sort of thickness. And then think about if a color spontaneously arises. There may or may not be one. It still works without it. And then assess if there's a movement or if it's static. And then determine how you feel about this feeling. So the top two are always, I don't like it or I'm afraid of it. I have had other variations like I'm just sad that it's here, I'm angry that it's here, but it's almost always those two. And so even if like what we're trying to do is accept the feeling, it's very important that we're honest about this with ourselves. What is my baseline? Even if I want to accept it, do I hate it? Do I really want to get rid of it? And we need to be honest in order to progress with this. So just determine that. And what we can do is start to explore it. So now I invite everyone to try to have as neutral of a mindset as possible as they're looking at these feelings in their body. Try to have the mindset of I'm a scientist or a doctor or an inspector of some sort that is just checking out and only interested in the facts about this area. I don't care about the story. I don't care about making assumptions about it. I don't want to make any meaning out of it. I'm just interested in facts: size, shape, color, density, location, movement. And see if you can put your story on hold during this time and just look at your internal experience. So we're not going to be using the part of the mind that's analyzing or trying to figure this out. We're not even going to be using the creative part of the mind that might be inventing some sort of image or color. We're only perceiving what is actually here as it is, knowing it can change in the next moment. And I'd like for you now to watch it like it is a movie. Watch this sensation like you're watching a show, a play, a movie, a fireworks show, artwork, however you want to think of it. And you're not writing the script of this movie. You're just an observer. And like a movie, when you're watching a movie that it means nothing about you. But it's amazing when things happen in our body, we make an assumption. This must mean something about me. See if we're making assumptions. I have made an assumption that this feeling is bad, or this feeling, being in my body is bad, or it means that something is wrong with me or my life. I don't know any of those things to be true. So just continue to watch it and see if you can just allow it to be as it is, enjoying it even. Because if it's just a show, and if it means nothing about you and it's not here to hurt you, see if you can just look at it with interest, with curiosity. And now notice if there's any part of you that thinks that this feeling being here is a problem. And then see if you can recognize that this feeling is actually not the problem. Rather, this feeling is your precious feelings about this problem that happened in your life. And that distinction is really important because we've oftentimes been taught to mistrust our own emotions. So if I'm feeling this way about this issue, then why am I now disliking my own emotion? Why can't I look at it and say, hey, you're giving me this red flag, or you're trying to protect me? See if you can look at this emotion with some kindness and with some compassion. This could be a part of you that's wanting to protect. It could be a part of you that just feels hurt, and it's probably a very young part of you. And see if we can show up for it with care. We can actually give it the quality of attention that it's looking for, which is, you're safe. I'm here for you. So this is the adult self kind of parenting the child self that's showing up as the emotion. And really looking at it like, tell me what's going on for you. And like we're really listening and experiencing this emotion fully. We're scanning it physically. We want to know everything about it. So we're just observing. When we do this, we are fully receiving the message that it is giving us. We are helping it feel seen and heard and cared for. And we can even think of it like a toddler that's, fallen down and scraped her knee. And just imagine the level of tenderness we would come at this toddler with. We would say, "Oh, is that what happened? Oh, let me see. Show me what happened. I want to know. I'm here to help you." And just with that level of tenderness, that's how we want to be approaching these emotions, embracing them fully, loving every little part of this emotion, which really means loving ourselves as we are with the emotions that are arising. So I'm going through a few various techniques. So I want to explain what we've done so far. We're looking at it, first of all, with this attitude of curiosity and acceptance and love and compassion. We're also challenging assumptions that we might have about this feeling. So I want to give an example. And this is kind of an extreme example, but it will really hit home, I think, for most people. So if I close my eyes right now and I imagine that my friend has died, and I start crying and my head hurts and I feel nauseated. Alyssa, do those feelings that I'm feeling in my body, do they prove that my friend has passed?
Yes and no, but
okay.
yeah. But I could go into something philosophical about that.
Yeah. Okay, so if a person is intuitive,
yes,
that's different, and that might be what. Okay,
yes.
But if this person is not intuitive and they it's just anxiety and they imagine it, does it prove without a doubt in that moment that has happened?
No,
it does not with everyone, not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And so with something extreme like that. I think people can see that if I just think of something and I have a feeling, I can't then use that feeling to then make the thought valid and, to justify the validity of the thought. But we do that all the time, if you think about it. So if I think about a time when I was young and someone said something mean to me, and I have this feeling, and then I say, this feeling means I'm not good enough. And I've made a huge leap there, but actually it doesn't mean that. It just means that I thought of a memory and a feeling got produced within me, or I thought of something and I believed that thought. It came up in my body. And instead of adding an additional layer of meaning to that, which I'm actually not sure if that's the meaning, I can just witness that sensation and give it love because it was hurt. And it breaks part of the trauma cycle when we do that.
Sure.
So this is another thing that we're doing. So we're questioning assumptions. We're coming at it with love. We're trying to befriend the emotions. We're trying to realize that, this emotion is not me. We're also trying to not identify. So it is my emotion, and it is very important to me, and it informs a lot of things about my life, but it is not my identity. And so if I can remember who I am as my emotions come and go, I don't have to get pulled in, and I've got a little bit of space. And so on my website, there is a video that kind of goes into all these different ways we can hack the trauma cycle. And so it's disidentification with thoughts and emotions, disproving and not making assumptions, disproving thoughts that we're believing, befriending our emotions, and then observing these sensations objectively. So these are things that a lot of people can start doing on their own.
Sure.
But when it comes to an actual trauma, I recommend you work with someone for that.
I agree.
Because with a trauma, a trauma happens when something is so big, it's larger than the amount of resources and capacity we have in that moment.
Sure.
And so it's very likely that when we revisit it, we don't have the tools in that moment. So we want to avoid re-traumatization.
Yeah.
So this is just a little bit of a, 15 minutes is not too long of a time, but it's just enough where people can start exploring that, okay, this is a whole different level of awareness in my body that I wasn't even aware of. It's this emotional awareness of a little bit of tightness here in my stomach that could be emotional, not necessarily just something I ate.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many things that people don't realize that, there's the emotions effect, especially when it comes to the stomach and tightness, or this or that, or shoulders or neck, or tension in the jaw.
Yes.
So I appreciate you leading our audience through, that simple exercise. And I completely agree with you. If someone has experienced trauma, I have recently had someone come in for a consult, because I offer complimentary consults.
Yeah.
And she was explaining she was having panic attacks. She's now in her 30s. And realizing, okay, I need to do something about this. One of the things that she brought up, which we look at too, is the adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
Survey.
The ACE.
I don't know technically what it was called, but that's something as yoga therapists we look at as well. And so whether it was in childhood or as an adult, or if it's that vicious cycle of recurring, you need the guidance of someone so that it's not re-traumatization.
Yes.
So that you're actually healing little by little. So I appreciate that you guided everyone through this, and giving them a little sense of just how tuning into the body and how much wisdom the body has in helping us, just move through and get underneath that storyline that we often have in our head, and listen to what our body's telling us. So any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, along with what you just said, I just want to encourage people to just trust their bodies, because imagine, I'm not having to wake up every morning and tell my heart, okay, make sure you beat today. I don't have to do that. It's just doing that for me. And the body goes through so many different processes, just keeping us alive and healthy. And it does the same thing with trauma. The body knows exactly what to do with trauma. What it is really getting the mind out of the way. The mind it should be like this. I shouldn't be doing this. Just getting the mind and making it the observer, and just kind of watching the body go through its genius processes, whatever that is. It might be that you're upset about something and you feel some heat in your arms, and you might need to punch a pillow. It might be that you need to dislodge that energy. And when you do that, it just goes away. Or if your jaw is tight, a lot of people try to tell you to relax it. And what SE says is the opposite. Tighten it more. Just like an animal who might be angry and wants to tighten it more. Allow it to complete its process. And there will be a moment where you don't need to tighten it anymore. And it will actually relax and get to the root level of that.
Yeah.
So I just like to end on that. Just kind of trust your body.
Yeah, so important, so important. So thank you for being on the show, Nina. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And for sharing all of that wisdom, because I'm just a huge proponent of people listening to their bodies and trusting their bodies, and knowing that there is a mind-body connection. And it's so powerful once we realize that. And so that's always my intention, to share all of this. So I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And again, like I mentioned before, we'll have links to your website, any information, what else we mentioned, and everything, so people can further understand your work, somatic experiencing in general, and how they can seek you out and learn some of these tools for themselves as well. So
Great.
Thank you, Nina. So if you enjoy listening to this podcast, and especially if you're listening on an app on your smartphone, please take a moment, rate us, and write a review. That helps spread all of this wonderful information about mind-body medicine to more people. And that's really, our intention here is to share all of this. So I really appreciate all of you joining us today. We'll be here same time, same place next week. I'm your host, Alyssa Finnig, and this is Wild Wisdom.